because it's the 25th anniversary of the Sustainable Innovation Conference, Martin wanted me to talk about the history of sustainable design and then where it needs to go now and in the future. So that's the theme here. Starting out, even before the modern environmental movement, way back in the 1800s, there were people like the Victorian poet Wordsworth railing against the pollution of industrialization. So there was lots of building awareness before that. But what I think for designers was the first globally important year was 1972. So that was when Limits to Growth was published, and Donella Meadows was also one of the main creators of System Dynamics and 12 Leverage Points. And that same year, there was the first UN conference in Stockholm on the environment, and it was also the year that Victor Papanek and Buckminster Fuller published Design for the Real World, and that was the first real book on sustainable product design. And then in the background, life cycle assessment, LCA, was first done actually in 1968 by Coca-Cola, of all people, but it got formalized in 1990 by CTAC. And that's also the year that industrial ecology was proposed, the idea that industrial systems should mimic natural ecosystems and closed-loop flows of materials. And the Eco-Design Strategy Wheel came out of TU Delft in 1994. And then industrial ecology led to biomimicry as a more general sustainability approach, designed by analogy not just of material flows of systems, but also physical product forms and functions and production processes. And then Cradle to Cradle deepened that metaphor further by distinguishing between the biocycle and the technocycle. It also suggested that we not aim for doing less bad, but to do good, and regenerative design is part of that. And then between those two, in the year 2000, the United Nations came out with their Millennium Development Goals, which then later in 2015 became the Sustainable Development Goals that we know today. And in 2005, the first R strategies came out. Back then, it was just reduce, reuse, recycle. Now it's up to 10 R's or 9 or 11, depending on who you ask. Yeah, and then also transition design came out in that same year, applying sustainable design concepts not just to product design, but to organizations. And it was not the first time that it was applied to systems. That was, way back with Limits to Growth and System Dynamics. But systems thinking comes and goes through the years. And then there was, in 2010, the Repair Manifesto by iFixit. Obviously, people have been repairing things for far longer, forever, basically. But I think this was the first time that it became a thing in the ideas of design, and it's become a big policy thing, not just in the EU, where repairability labeling is mandatory for some product categories in several countries and is going to be rolled out across the EU in coming years, but even in the US with right to repair laws in many states. And then people think of the circular economy idea as coming out in 2012. Actually, that term was coined in the 1970s by Walter Stahl, but Ellen MacArthur did a great job of popularizing it in 2012. And more recently, I would say the most significant new sustainable design movement is diversity, equity, and inclusion. The term decolonized design was actually coined in 2016, but it became big in 2020 with the Black Lives Matter movement in the US. And then degrowth is also being talked about a lot more. I honestly don't think it will ever be big in product design, but I think in policy and economics and society. And then in 2030, the UN will meet to have new development goals. We'll see what those are. And who knows what the future brings. So that's it for history. And I think the reason there have been so many different sustainability movements over time is that actual improvement is often small and slow. And we're always constantly reinventing the wheel, and this frustrates people. So they criticize the mindsets before then. Eco-design was criticized for allowing incrementalism, biomimicry and cradle-to-cradle were criticized for allowing large bad impacts alongside small good ones. Circular economy is criticized for not stopping consumerism. But I think the real problem is not with any of these mindsets. I think the real problem is implementing them. That's why I named my new textbook Sustainable Design from Vision to Action, because action is where we're falling short. So, for example, lots of designers read the Cradle to Cradle book, but only about 1% of them do Cradle to Cradle certification. The book is a great book. It's one of the best. But if you just read it and do normal design methods while thinking green thoughts, you are way less likely to make big change and way more likely to greenwash. If you do the certification, it brings rigor into your practice so that you can establish bold goals and then see how well you did or didn't do with specific assessments. And that the problem is that it's hard to do that certification. It's time consuming and technical. And so a lot of people don't do it. So we need to figure out how to have high levels of rigor and bold goals and accountability while still having easy, fast processes for designers and engineers to do. So that's why I and several other colleagues listed here wrote this paper, The Research Roadmap for Sustainable Design Methods and Tools, back in 2020. It's kind of a manifesto on that. We argued that all the sustainable design methods I just showed you are kind of developed in the way that craftsmen of the pre-industrial era designed things. You know, had a good idea, maybe test it with a handful of people around them, make one nice version and send it out into the world, hoping people will like it. But if we want to scale sustainable design to match the scale of industrial production, we need to get serious about this and make our sustainable design methods and tools the way that good designers make physical products for industry. Human-centered design at scale. So this means doing user need finding at scale. So this graphic here is a version of the human-centered design or design thinking process, and translating into sustainable design methods and how to develop them well. We need to clarify the needs of industry and then ideate new sustainable design tools and methods. And most importantly, we need to prototype and user test lots of different versions, and we need to iterate all this a lot of times. And then even after that, even after we've come up with good solutions, we also need to put time and effort into deploying and scaling. You know, companies manufacturing things, they don't just do the design process and then finish. They have marketing departments and advertising departments to get people to actually use their products. And we need to do the same thing for sustainable design tools and methods. So we clumped these, as you can see, into 4 research questions. And then we turned those 4 research questions into a more detailed set of themes. And for each of those, we decided on short-term, medium, and long-term tasks for all of those. And so, for example, for research question 1 on the needs and values of industry, themes there were, what are the existing tools and industry needs that are already known, and industry applicability and differences. You know, how universal are industry's needs versus how different are the needs across different industries or between different kinds of companies, even in the same industry, and digitalization as well. And like I said, there's short-term, medium-term, and long-term tasks for all of these. So, for example, for existing tools and industry needs, a medium-term task that we decided was to deconstruct existing methods into their component mindsets and activities to identify their value. Just like if you're designing a mobile phone, you might say, what do people really value in the mobile phone? Do they really like the big screen or the brightness of the screen or the camera quality or the audio quality, etc., etc. We need to do that same kind of identification for our sustainable design tools and methods. Or for another example, research question 2, ideating sustainable design tools and methods. In the short term, we should develop a decision rubric for recommending different methods and tools by their business value. For example, biomimicry is valued for its creative ideation. Life cycle assessment is valued for its decision-making power and power to set priorities, etc. And I won't take the whole time to go through all of these, but obviously we had many different themes and tasks for how to develop useful sustainable design tools and methods, the prototyping and user testing, like testing what actually works in the long term and actually gets implemented in companies in the long term. How can we consolidate tools and methods to make them faster and easier to use, etc. And then integration into industry. There's a bunch of points here. I won't get into them all. 2 of them are about education. Others are about working with industry, and others systemic aids externally, like policy. And so what does all this look like in practice? What we talked about in that roadmap there. Here's one example of my PhD back at Dartmouth, Teja Chatty. So here's the paper that we wrote and the other authors here. We worked with a company called Synapse. They're the engineering consulting arm of Capgemini, and we learned their existing product development process, which you see shown across the top here. And then we taught them some sustainable design tools and methods and asked what they already knew and asked what they valued about all of these things. And then we worked with them to integrate these tools and methods into their existing workflow over the course of several months. And this then became the default way that they design all products from now on. So this goes from give someone a fish and they eat for a day to teach them how to fish and they eat forever. And this works for any kind of company. Like this was a consultancy, but we also did the same process for a business unit in Stanley Black & Decker. And the LCA that they did predicts that just the first product redesign that they did with their new process that we co-created with them, just the first product that they redesigned will avoid over 2,800 tons of CO2 emissions per year. And again, that's not just that one product that they did. In addition to that, they will design all their new products by default, considering sustainability. And for the future of design education, this was a project with Don Norman and others. So our part was sustainability in the future of design education. You can see the paper and the other authors here. And like I was saying before, in that research question number 4 of how do we drive adoption, even after we already have good sustainable design tools and methods, what do we do? So in this paper, we kind of had another manifesto where we proposed core ideas in 6 different curriculum areas and made more specific topics for each of those curricula at 3 different levels, which I'll explain in a second. And then we provided lists of resources for all of those curricula. So, for example, the curriculum areas were fundamentals of sustainability, circular economy, systems, sustainable innovation, impact assessment, and collaboration. And to give you a little bit more detail in just one of these fundamentals of sustainability, the core ideas that we had there were, roughly speaking, I'm not going to read all of these. You can pause the video if you want, or even better, look up the paper. But all humans depend on nature and are part of it. Economics depends on society, which depends on the environment. Design choices cause environmental and social impacts, and designers have a responsibility to consider those. And social and environmental consequences are intertwined. So I don't think any of these are controversial for people who already do sustainable design, but that's the point. These are fundamentals of sustainability, and they're not acknowledged by lots of designers and engineers today. Certainly not taught in most classes. So again, that's just for one of these curriculum areas. Then we have ideas in these other areas as well. And to translate into actual curriculum, we have it at 3 different levels, like I said a second ago. There's the level that all design students need to know or be able to do. And then there's the level at which sustainable design specialists need to be able to know things and do things. And finally, there's the elective or advanced level. And just as an example of what fundamentals of sustainability topics that we think all design students need to know are, they are here. And again, I'm not going to read all of these. You can check out the paper for the details, but we think all designers should know basic definitions of environmental, social, and economic sustainability. And they should at least have heard of planetary boundaries and UN Sustainable Development Goals, etc. And we have these kinds of curriculum topics at the different levels, and then for all the other areas that I said. And then in addition to the actual topics, you need to be able to teach this stuff. So what homeworks or books or websites exist? So we listed links to mostly websites and then some books on these topics. So these are just ones for fundamentals of sustainability. And a related initiative is the Engineering for One Planet project led by the Lemelson Foundation back in the US. And so they also have a recommended set of topics to teach. And they've actually gotten much further in terms of getting things integrated into certification standards for universities. And they're doing great work over there. But like our paper, Sustainability in the Future of Design Education, it's all high-level topics. It's not actual textbooks and homeworks and projects you can teach from. And that's why I and several colleagues wrote this book, Sustainable Design from Vision to Action. And it's why I'm so excited about it. So sorry if this seems sales pitchy, but I think it fills a critical gap that's been missing for decades. It connects the high-level concepts of sustainable design to concrete, step-by-step guides on how to apply them. I think we have all the theory we need, but we need to make it actionable. And all those key historical tools and methods that I talked about are in the book, as well as cutting-edge TU Delft research that you can't find anywhere else. You can see more details at the link here, and the QR code goes to that URL, which redirects to the publisher. So what are some examples of what's in the book? Well, everything from quick, simple lookup tables of what's a greener metal to choose in your product or what's a greener plastic to use, tagged by what things have good strength or low density or are food safe, etc. So there's that, to more technical lookup tables of what materials can and can't be recycled together. Like when your product gets shredded for recycling, if the gold can't be separated from the copper, for example, in a printed circuit board, that's actually okay, because if it gets in the copper recycling stream, the chemical processing will recover them both. But if the gold is mixed in with aluminum or steel recycling streams, it won't get recovered and can just contaminate the aluminum or steel streams. But then that begs the question, how do you make sure that these different materials do get separated when the product gets shredded in a recycling plant? Well, you look at the kinds of connections your different components have within the product. So for example, if that bit of gold is screwed onto pieces of aluminum or steel, that's okay for manual dismantling, like for repair and remanufacturing, but it can be a little problematic for shredding, mechanical disintegration. It's not the best. So if you want something better, a snap fit or maybe a turn lock or friction fit, etc., will be good for actually both manual dismantling and mechanical disintegration. Or if you want your product to power itself from renewable energy, like this solar-powered keyboard, we have the equations in the book to see if it's feasible and how big a PV panel and battery you would need. And I know this sounds hard, but it's just high school math. It's not actually difficult. And you can even calculate whether it should power itself or if the embodied impacts of making the PV and battery are worse than the impacts of the grid electricity that you'll save. And we have 2 different chapters on whole systems thinking. We have 3 chapters on life cycle assessment. And in addition to that, even if you don't want to learn how to do LCA yourself, it provides a bunch of pre-calculated LCAs, like this is one for a laptop and for a t-shirt and for an office chair, so that you don't need to do the LCA yourself. You can just look at this pre-calculated one and see where the big impacts are and connect those to what sustainable design strategies would be useful. But not every tool or method in the book is technical. Some are high-level vision, some are business, and a couple are people skills. So this is a business model canvas with Presidio's sustainability booster ideas on it. Or this is the positionality wheel by Leslie Ann Noel for diversity and inclusion conversations. It helps us talk about how our gender, race, age, etc. affect how we work together. Or this is nonviolent communication. It's useful both for diversity and inclusion conversations and just a universal teamwork skill. There's a whole chapter on collaboration and support because sustainability groups often have very few people doing way too much, so you need great collaboration and you need to get support and give support. Also, because working in sustainability is often just psychologically and emotionally hard. We need to have compassion for each other and ourselves while still striving for as much impact as we can do. So these people skills and emotional skills are things you can learn, just like you learn LCA or design for disassembly. And as I said, the real key about this book is that every chapter has step-by-step exercises on how to apply. You can see it even has time estimates for each one. This step will take 5 to 20 minutes. This step will take 30 minutes to 3 hours, etc. And you don't have to do things the way that the exercises say, but it gives you practice to become fluent. And so even though I am very excited about the book, you don't have to buy it, but whether or not you use it, I do hope that you're not just thinking green thoughts while doing normal design methods, but that you have tools and methods to formulate clear, bold visions and make evidence-based decisions to act on them effectively. So that's it. Thank you very much.